What would you eat if you wanted to open your third eye? A bitter root steeped at dawn? A resin burned in a cave? The question sounds like it should have a single dramatic answer, and yet the truth is slipperier. Sometimes a sip is only a symbol, and sometimes the real food is attention itself. Today, we'll travel from a dusty cache of ancient manuscripts to a quiet somatic experiment you can do in your chair. This is not a recipe for a miracle. It is an invitation to notice, to test, and to consider what it means to ingest attention. In 1945, peasant farmers near Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt uncovered a sealed jar containing brittle papyrus codices, books that had been hidden for centuries. Those manuscripts, which scholars now call the Nag Hammadi Library, contained a range of early Christian and Gnostic writings that emphasize inner knowledge, or anamnesis. The idea that remembering one's deeper origin is a form of awakening. These texts were provocative because they put direct experience at the center. Salvation as remembrance, rather than solely as ritual belonging. Interpretations vary. Some scholars read these texts as early experiments in spiritual psychology, others as sectarian theology. They are one interpretive tradition within a wider, complicated religious landscape, not a substitute for canonical histories or doctrines. Within that interpretive frame, certain cosmological images recur. The monad is sometimes spoken of as the one, the primal source of being. The demiurge is portrayed in some texts as a lesser creator who fashions the visible world. Archons are described as forces or patterns that obstruct perception, habits of mind, social structures, or internal distractions. These terms are metaphors as much as metaphysics. They help map the terrain of attention and forgetfulness. Seen this way, an archon might be the impulse to check your phone. The demiurge could be the story that reduces your inner life to social roles. The point for our purposes is not to settle any ancient debate, but to borrow a useful map. Spiritual obstacles can be understood as patterns to be noticed, and ritual devices can be ways of focusing the senses so memory, anamnesis, has a chance. So, what did monks drink? We should separate two things. First, historically, ascetics and contemplatives in many cultures used simple beverages and aromatic substances as part of their lives. Tea, bitter infusions, hydrosols, and various botanical drinks show up across monastic rules and travelers' reports. These were not magic potions guaranteed to produce visions. They functioned as aids to discipline, wakefulness, or ritual marking. A hot, plain infusion at dawn can be a structural anchor for a day that wants to fragment. Bitterness can be a reminder of restraint. An aromatic steam can cue a shift from ordinary time to practice time. Second, in the languages of some ancient writers, to drink or taste was also metaphorical. Taste as an encounter with truth or attention. So the same verb could mean both a literal cup and an interior orientation. To make this more human, meet Amun, an illustrative figure, not a historical reconstruction. Amun is a hypothetical monk who rises before dawn, lights a lamp, and takes a small cup. He does not expect that cup to flood him with visions. Instead, the cup marks an intention. I will be awake. The warmth of it steadies his hands. The bitterness, if present, is a boundary. This is practice time, not leisure. He uses the cup to align body and word. A short verse, a recalled name, a breath counted. The drink is a hinge that helps his circulation of attention move from scattered to sustained. Amun's story stands for countless small practices through history, where taste, heat, fragrance, and gesture were woven into systems of vigilance. If you're still with me, and if a small part of you hoped for a single edible key to unlock inner sight, here is the crucial pivot. What those communities ate to open awareness often turned out to be ritualized cues, gestures, words, and sensory markers that synchronized body, word, and memory. The beverages were cultural devices that oriented attention. They were not pharmacological guarantees. And that distinction matters ethically. It guards against reckless experimentation and honors the layered meanings of ritual. Now I want to offer a short, gentle somatic experiment you can do where you are. The aim is simple. Learn to notice whether small, repeated gestures and sensory anchors change your felt experience of attention. This is not clinical testing. It is personal observation. Do this only if sitting quietly is safe and comfortable for you. If you have physical conditions that make certain postures difficult, adapt the gestures or skip them. Keep everything mild, no breath retention, no extreme postures. Sit comfortably with your back supported and your feet grounded or resting. Let your breathing be natural, no forcing. Notice where you are holding tension and invite it to soften for the moment. When you feel settled, bring your attention to the base of your skull, the nape where neck meets head. Lightly place the pads of your fingers there. No pressure, just contact. Notice temperature, texture, any subtle pulls or releases. There is no correct sensation, only observation. After a few breaths, lift your hand and, with your other hand, rest it along the outer edge near your pinky, the fleshy line where the hand meets wrist. Feel the boundary of your hand as if tracing the outline of something familiar. Notice any shift in your attention as your fingers trace that line. Finally, bring both hands to rest, one on your sternum at the center of your chest, the region commonly called the heart area. Let your palms soften there and, if you like, place the palm flat or slightly curved, whatever feels natural. Breathe softly and notice how the weight of your hand changes the felt space inside your chest. If it helps to orient, you may choose a short, quiet phrase to hold in mind as a compass, a contemporary, optional condensation of practices across histories. Something like, I remember my source. I open to light. Repeat it silently, without striving for meaning. Let it be a gentle anchor, not a command. Observe what happens during and after each touch. Some people report warmth, clarity, or a subtle sense of alignment. Others notice nothing at all. Both outcomes are informative. After the practice, you might write 1 or 2 lines about what you observed, temperature, imagery, muscle tone, or the mood of your attention. Keep it brief. This is a minimal data point, an invitation to curiosity. I want to pause on the language of opening the third eye. That phrase has a long cultural life and evokes a kind of heightened inner sight. In this context, treat the third eye as shorthand for refined attention, the capacity to feel subtle sensations, to notice the habitual interruptions of attention, to remember and shift orientation toward presence. It is helpful as a poetic aim, but it is not a clinical organ nor a guaranteed endpoint. Practice can increase sensitivity and recall. It does not promise visions or supernatural states. Some people will report changes. Many will not. The important thing is the trajectory. Repeated, respectful practice tends to cultivate steadier attention. When we return to the question of what to eat, there are safe, historically attested examples we can name as cultural reference points without prescribing use. Across traditions, people have used plain teas in the morning to signal wakefulness, bitter tubers and tonics as markers of ascetic practice, aromatic smoke, incense, cedar, or resins as a way to change the sensory environment and cue a switch into ritual time. These items served as anchors for groups and individuals learning to train attention. If you encounter them in historical texts, read them as ritual technology, tools that create a shared sensorium. I will not give recipes, dosages, or instructions for preparing anything beyond saying that, for many communities, a humble cup of something warm was enough to shape intention. Importantly, do not assume that an exotic or hard-to-obtain substance is necessary or safer. In most historical settings, simplicity was prized. Safety, legality, and bodily health must guide any personal choices. A few cautions, because clarity is a form of care. Do not ingest psychoactive, illegal, or medically risky substances in the hope of opening your third eye. I will not advise or describe such substances here. If you have concerns about mental health, or if past experiences with altered states have been destabilizing, consult a qualified clinician or a trusted spiritual guide before experimenting with contemplative methods. Avoid absolutist language. There is no single method that guarantees awakening. When we borrow categories from Gnosticism, monad, demiurge, archons, we use them as interpretive metaphors. These texts offer rich, often provocative ways to think about attention and forgetfulness, but they are one tradition among many within the history of religious thought. Respect for other traditions and critical discernment are essential. What then is the practical answer to the question in our title? If eat means literal ingestion, history suggests monks and contemplatives used simple, legal, mild beverages as temporal anchors for practice. Tea, warm water, small bitter infusions, and aromatic steams, primarily as cultural markers rather than chemical shortcuts. If eat is allowed to mean take into the body of your attention, then the list grows. Breath, a brief phrase, a touch to the nape or sternum, the ritual of washing, the repetition of a name. These are low-cost, safe foods that can be practiced daily and whose effects are cumulative rather than immediate. The deeper point is that the dish that matters most is not found in the cupboard. It is assembled in repetition, in the choreography of body, word, and memory. If you choose to experiment with these practices, consider doing so in community or with a teacher when possible. Tradition often offers context, safeguards, and a vocabulary for interpreting experiences. Community also helps normalize the variability of outcomes. One person's small shift may look like nothing to another. If you do try the brief somatic exercise I offered, please share a single word and one line about your observation in the comments. Write recognition and then a short note such as mild warmth at nape or nothing yet, felt calm. That will create a modest dataset of lived curiosities without pressuring anyone into dramatic claims. Before we close, a few final reflections. Rituals that involve taste and scent are not magic. They are technologies of attention. A cup can be a threshold. What you do with the moment of drinking decides whether it becomes a door. The ingenuity of past seekers was not in discovering a universal psychoactive elixir, but in creating simple, repeatable signals that coordinated body and memory. If opening the third eye is understood as cultivating a more attentive life, then the menu is not exotic. It is accessible. Breath, touch, a short phrase, a repeated gesture, community. These are the items I would recommend you sample first. The cup, after all, is a humble image, small, finite, and held in human hands. Place it to your lips. Remember the purpose you set for it. Let the warmth remind you to return. Over time, that small ritual may weave itself into a larger fabric of attention. Whether that amounts to a profound shift or a series of quiet, meaningful adjustments depends on the steadiness of your practice, not on a single ingredient. If you found this exploration useful and want a series that digs deeper into the texts, the practices, and the historical context behind them, subscribe now for future episodes. And when you try the short exercise, leave recognition in the comments with one line about what you noticed. I'll read a selection in the next session, and we'll treat those observations as companions rather than proof. May whatever you take into your body, be it a simple cup or the quieter nourishment of attention, be a careful, ethical, and respectful companion on a path that is long, communal, and guarded by patience.